Welcome to the Scientific Sense podcast, where we explore emerging ideas from science, policy, economics, and technology. My name is Gil Eapen. We talk with world's leading academics and experts about their recent research or general areas of topical interest. Scientific Sense is an unstructured conversation with no agenda or preparation. We cover a wide variety of domains where new discoveries are made and new technologies are developed on a daily basis. We are most interested in how new ideas affect society and help educate the world how to pursue a rewarding and enjoyable life rooted in science, logic, and information. We seek knowledge without boundaries or constraints and provide unedited content of conversations with researchers and leaders who love what they do. A companion blog to this podcast can be found at scientificsense.com, and this podcast is available on over a dozen platforms and directly at scientificsense.net. If you have suggestions for topics, guests, and other ideas, please send them to info@scientificsense.com, and I can be reached at gil@eapen.info. My guest today is Professor William Baker, who is a professor and journalist in residence at Fordham University in New York. He is also professor of media and entertainment at IESE Business School in Barcelona, Spain, and President Emeritus of WNET-Thirteen, New York's public television station. Professor Baker is a recipient of 7 Emmy Awards, 2 Columbia DuPont Journalism Awards, and honored in 2016 by the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center for his work in the performing arts. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Gil. Really nice to be here and talk to you.
I know that you have a book that came out recently, and we'll get to that. But I want to start with one of your previous books. I think it came out in 2016, entitled "The World is a Stage: How Performing Artists Can Make a Living While Still Doing What They Love." I don't know a lot about performing arts, Bill, but I would love to hear, what you explore there. And I think you had a co-author on that book as well, right?
Right. I had actually 2 co-authors. One, Evan Leatherwood, who worked with me and was at the time my kind of resident genius. He was one of the scholars, a Slivka scholar, who worked for me. And then my oldest friend. I'm in my 70s, and he's been a friend since the 2nd grade. So over 70 years. And he is he owned an engineering company in California. He has a PhD from Case Western Reserve in mechanical engineering. Owned a mechanical engineering design company, and then became a professor of economics. Later got a degree in economics at one of the California universities. He lives in San Francisco. At any rate, I had him do the economics part of it because he's a lot smarter than I am. The purpose of the book, it's called "The World's Your Stage," and it's for performing artists. It was kind of interesting. Yeah. I was asked, 11 years ago, by Dr. Joseph Polisi, who is the president of Juilliard, because I had told him, I said, Joe, I'm teaching all these courses at colleges all over, fairly distinguished colleges, Harvard and my old school. I would never taught at Case, but a number of schools, and Columbia. And I said, I've never taught at Juilliard. He said, well, why don't you teach? So I started teaching a course at Juilliard. Now, I'm not a performing artist, but I know the business very well because when I was president of public TV in New York, we were the biggest producers of serious performing arts programming in America. So we knew the people, we knew the industry. I knew how complicated it was and what many of the pitfalls are, which are many. And here I was suddenly teaching a course at Juilliard about the business. And I was also asked by Father McShane, who is the president of Fordham, he said, "Wouldn't it be great if we combined with Juilliard?" And you did a course on the subject of the business of the performing arts. And I said, "Oh yeah, that'll be easy. I should be able to do that with my eyes closed." Well, turns out that's really, really difficult. It's a very complicated industry, and it's a very hard industry. And my students, my Juilliard students, were, of course, among the very finest performers in the world. Happens that Juilliard is the hardest school in America to get into, and you don't apply to Juilliard if you're you're not really good in the first place, and it's only got a 1% acceptance rate. At any rate, so arguably my students, when they were graduating, and I had graduate and undergraduate students, were at whatever instrument or performing skill they might have, singing, dancing, acting, maybe the best in the world, or among the best in the world.
Yeah.
And then, but what happens? Well, getting a job in a profession where, let's say you want a job in a symphony orchestra. You may be among the best in the world, but every year there are 5,000 people coming out of conservatories in the world, and 300 jobs in major orchestras. So no matter how good you are, your chances are very remote. So basically what we did is this book that showed the economics, and it also showed, hey, if you're going to really make it, chances are you're not going to, God bless you if you do, but the chances are remote that you're going to get hired by somebody like the Cleveland Orchestra or something, or the New York Phil, or some major opera company. What you're going to have to do is become an entrepreneur. Well, that's that means you're going to be running a business. You're going to be promoting. You're going to have to figure out a new way to do something where somebody's going to come and pay for what you have to offer. These are skills that are not in your, not likely to be in your portfolio. So we're going to have to teach you all that stuff. And so it was really a challenge. One, it was a challenge to understand this subject in general. Number two, and we had the finest people in the profession also come, because we were at Juilliard and we were right at Lincoln Center, so we had Peter Gelb, head of the Metropolitan Opera. We had Rachel Moore, who was at that time the head of the ABT, a former ballet dancer herself, then wound up broke her ankle, became head of the American Ballet Theater, and then after that, by the way, now is running the Music Center of Los Angeles, which is the second or third biggest performing arts center in America. And so it was interesting, but very, very, I'd say more than anything, heartbreaking. You see these really brilliant people, and one of my students was a brilliant concert pianist. He got his master's at Juilliard, and he performed everywhere, including Carnegie Hall. And he finally said, "This is impossible." And he's right now selling equities for a company. And so he's a stockbroker, in effect, not a stockbroker, but a little bit higher level than that. Has no background in finance, but he has a charming personality and a grand piano in his office, and somehow and then see, that's it. He the people that hired him, which was a major firm in New York, they said, "We know all about the financial models and all that stuff. We just want somebody who is a receptor who can attract clients that have high levels of wealth." And he started an organization of board members of these big performing arts institutions who are all pretty much rich people, and they would get together, and then they'd slip in their sales pitch in the middle of that. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the economics of this is so challenging, as you say. It's so skewed that the ones that make it do really well, but the probability of making it is so low. I would imagine it's similar to the sports leagues, right? Playing the NBA or something along those lines. which is significantly different from a conventional career like engineering or medicine or something
Correct.
like that.
Yes.
So that is where the challenge is. And I don't know how one would manage it at the individual level. But perhaps some sort of portfolio type management might be needed. I don't know if it is mechanistically possible. I was also looking at the numbers you had, in terms of the economics of the Metropolitan Opera, and their budget is $325 million, and you say they often operate at a loss.
Yes.
So even those institutions are having a hard time.
Well, excuse me. Well, now even more than ever, what is happening, because of course there's nobody in the seats at the places. Now they've cut all of their costs, but still the overhead is massive. The Metropolitan Opera is the biggest performing arts organization in America. The second or third biggest, which is Cirque du Soleil, just went bankrupt. You're headed for trouble. You've got other big organizations. I don't know what's happening. There's some arguably say the Cleveland Orchestra might be the best orchestra in America. How they're going to keep going during this when you can't? It might be a year before you can have people in your audience. It's all about development right now. That is fundraising, raising money. That's what it's all about, trying to keep the arts alive. No government support generally. And you think also about, forget, even the performing arts. Think about the other arts, the art museums. They're all in really serious trouble. And rich people, even though they're phenomenally generous, many of them, and have given hundreds of millions of dollars, it's not enough to plug the hole. The number of employees at a place like, say, the Metropolitan Museum of Art's probably 2,000 or more. What are you? Same at Lincoln Center, same at Music Center for Los Angeles. What is the Music Center for Los Angeles going to do? They have 2,000 employees now. You probably can lay off, 1,000 of them, but right. Which is heartbreaking. But you still are going to have all that plus the general overhead. You got to keep the lights going and the heat and air conditioning running. So it's really a job.
Yeah, it is scary, and these are modalities that you can really, the remote thing that we are going into in education and other business type work. This is not something that is amenable to that, right? So that is where the difficulty is going to come.
Mm. It's a time when a lot of new models are going to happen. It's a time when the world is going to change. The business models are going to change, and many of the legacy organizations in this country might not be able to serve. Of the best legacy organizations in this country and around the world may not survive. And that just breaks my heart. And that goes for, by the way, education. What about higher education in America? And that's another frighteningly troubled institution. We know that, Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, Stanford will all be around because their endowments are so massive. But what about a normal school? Forget it. It's danger zone right now. Danger zone.
And on a related topic, you also had an op-ed a couple of years ago about the public television in the U.S. And I found it very interesting, Bill, that you talked about the German public television and how different it is. And I would love to hear from you. This was a couple of years ago. Do you? I would imagine things have gotten worse in the U.S. I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, it's interesting too that you were able to spot that article I did about the Tagesschau, the German program on ARD, one of the German networks. It's interesting. Well, let me talk about Germany and public media in Germany. It's after World War II. It was decided that if Germany was going to exist, they needed to use the media better, and it was really the Americans and the Brits that came up with the idea of really having them do a major define public media. Well, the most publicly supported, the biggest budgets in public media, television and radio in the world are in Germany. And with that kind of money, it's something like $10 billion a year in a country 20% the size of the United States. In the United States, the government spends $400 million on public television. In Germany, it's over $10 billion. And so you have television there and radio and journalism, public television, radio, and journalism that is impeccable. And because it takes money to do serious journalism and to do really high quality television and radio programs. Well, they spend it, and it is so trusted in Germany by the German people that that even though you've seen audiences in America on television, like big newscasts. Remember when Walter Cronkite was in America, half of the country used to watch that one newscast every night. So you had what we in the industry used to call a common campfire. That you'd come back to the office the next day and half of the people in the office had seen that newscast. So you had a common starting point, a framework to talk about issues of the day. Well, now audiences in America are so fragmented that, if you get a 5 or 10 share right now, which means 10% of the people watching, you're a strong number one. Right. And nobody even gets that. So TV audiences and radio have for many years been so fragmented that the audiences are relatively small. They're still, because the country's so big, they're still in the millions, but it may be, our public TV broadcast, our national public TV broadcast may only get is certainly under 2 million people in a country of over 330 million people. Wow. So, and that goes for the commercial people as well. So what happens? We have all this fragmented audience. We don't have people are all listening to stuff that they just want to believe themselves. So we have all these highly polarized people in America, whereas in Germany, they have people have such trust for their public media there, particularly, that everybody watches it, huge percentage of people, and their audiences today are as big as they were 20 years ago, even though they have as much competition in Germany as they do in the United States. So what does that say? Well, it says a lot of things. Therefore, the German TV audience is the biggest in the world in news.
It's about 10 million people.
Yeah, compared to what we have, when you add all of our American newscasts together, cable broadcast, they don't even, they just, they may be bigger because we're such a bigger country, but certainly not in share. If you add all the shares of all of our audiences together, they don't come anywhere of all the cable, the broadcast, etc., the public, the commercial, they don't come anywhere near what the Germans have in one channel. Right. So, then you wonder why the country is doing so well. Well, it's obviously a strong public network, which is really helping them. So the idea that the Americans had after the end of the Second World War to rebuild Germany and the Brits was a good one. They just didn't have the same idea for America itself, unfortunately.
So what's the status quo for public media in general in the United States?
The status quo for public media in general is worrisome. Luckily, every year the governments have tried to cut back the government money that goes into public TV for the last 10 years has been about $400 million, TV and radio. But that's a huge, infrastructure. You've got 350 public TV stations, a couple thousand radio stations. So it doesn't go very far, $400 million. So most of the money that goes into public media and public TV and radio in America is viewers and members like you, people making contributions. So that's why people like me, right, who was the president of public TV in New York for 20 years, they all recognized me as a guy with my hand out, begging for money all the time. It was pretty difficult, and that's what it is. And people have now started reaching exhaustion, because so many people need money, and they figure, well, public TV and radio will be around, et cetera, and that may not be the case. So what will happen is it won't disappear. It'll be eaten away, eaten alive, so it'll just get weaker and weaker and weaker. That's what happened. That's what's happened in general in the media in America. Whereas the Germans, using my old example, have maintained huge government support, huge amounts of money. That has not gone down. In America, probably the funding on all levels will start creeping down. Certainly underwriting has disappeared, meaning, commercial, it's quasi-commercial support. And when you just don't have money, you just can't make great TV and radio. It's that simple.
Yeah, yeah. I want to just switch gears and briefly touch on, you made a movie also, Bill. It's called Sacred.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't watched the movie, but I find the topic really fascinating. So it explores faith from around the globe, examining religious rituals from birth to death. Could you briefly talk about it a bit?
Sure, Gil. The film ran a year ago, December. It premiered on National Public TV. Before that, it was in theaters all over the world. The idea was to make a movie. This is in my kind of retirement after public television, but make it for public TV. I'm a personal person of faith, and I find, but in a very ecumenical way, and I find all faiths to be fascinating and interesting. But look at faith as from a kind of ritualistic point of view. How different people in different cultures in different parts of the world celebrate their religions, and celebrate. It's really, how are people all over the world trying to get to God, trying to communicate with God. So. What I did was I thought, well, I'm going to make this movie. I had made a number of films before, so I had, and I had been president of public TV in New York for a long time. So I thought I said, like the Juilliard thing, well, this will be easy. Well, it wasn't at all. I mean, how do you take on a subject of that scale? I wound up hiring Tom Lennon. Tom Lennon is an Academy Award a filmmaker. So he came up with the idea of doing, for the first time, in effect, because also if you deal with people in their religion and their faith, you just can't walk in with a crew from New York or Hollywood, storm into their religion, and expect to get anything. People are going to be on the muscle, they're going to be upset, or whatever it might be. I mean, they might be cooperative, but it's not going to be the same way as finding somebody who's part of that life and who knows. So he wound up finding and hiring 40 different great filmmakers all over the world in the strangest places, like including Madagascar and places, and had them celebrate the faith of the major faiths of their community. For example, I didn't know Madagascar, many of the citizens there, what they do is they rebury all of their ancestors. They have these big tombs, and they go into them every year and pull their deceased relatives out and rewrap them. They don't take the wrappings all the way off, but rewrap them and celebrate and have a drunken blast and put them back in the tomb. So it's a way to say, hey, I really come from someplace. In this country, you kind of hide death. You hide your past. People used to 50 years ago go and visit their relatives' funeral cemeteries. They don't even do that anymore. Right. So I think there are a lot of really interesting and wonderful things. Of course, the Catholic religion all over the world is fascinating and somewhat different in different places, particularly Eastern Europe, where we did some filming. There's we were in a prison with a couple convicts who were lifers there and were never going to get out, but they found God and became kind of preachers in this prison in Louisiana. Pretty fascinating. At any rate, it was a joy and a privilege to make the film, and and one of our professors at Juilliard did the audio, did the soundtrack. It was really quite powerful. It won a bunch of awards and was seen in theaters all over the world. And we had a co-producer, a Japanese public broadcasting co-producer, and we started out by following a Japanese monk, circling this, doing this 1,000-day walk. And basically not even eating. Toward the end, didn't eat anything. And it became a way to kind of prepare himself for his life as a true monk. Anyway, it was really quite a beautiful film.
Oh, well, yeah, I'll try to get a view of that, Bill. So I want to jump into your latest book, and it's called Organizations for People: Caring Cultures, Basic Needs, and Better Lives. This is truly a book about people and how and why people matter in an organization. So you say in the book, as a country, we are slowly losing the social, human nourishment we require for our happiness and well-being. When managing a large commercial broadcast business, I soon realized that when hiring a person, we are also hiring a family. Do you want to talk a little bit about the premise of the book and really how you developed ideas?
Sure, Gil, and this is an area that you know a lot about too. I know you did some work in the same area. First, let me talk about a little bit about my academic background. Of course, I was a media person for my whole professional career, which was and still going, and that's been almost 50 years. And but when I was in graduate school at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, they had a really significant school of industrial psychology there, and I thought probably I would not go into media because I was smart enough then to know that the chances of making it in media were pretty remote. So I thought I better have something else to do, and I thought I love this area of industrial psychology and organizational behavior. Why don't I get into that? Well, many of the studies back then were doing studies, and you're a scientist, so this would resonate with you. So a lot of the studies back then, the early studies in industrial psych, were things like they were all pretty much in factories. And for example, AT&T, the original AT&T that was running Western Electric, making the telephones and all, in these huge factories would, do things like experiment by seeing how, if you turn up the lights real bright, do people work harder in the assembly lines and all, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so they did a lot of those kinds of studies. They weren't brutal studies, but times have changed and everything else. And I had kind of drifted away from industrial psychological research because I was a practitioner and honestly didn't know what I was doing anyway. And I was kind of just feeling my way around. I was a fine television and radio producer, but I think a terrible manager. So, it was all by observation that I had a series of really bad bosses. So my observation wasn't very good either. I thought, well, this is the way you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be a jerk. And so I watched the movies. I mean, that's the way most of us learn how to be a boss. You watch the movies and TV all wrong. Right. So I teamed up. I wound up having a friend who was a full-time working industrial psychologist, Dr. Michael O'Malley, who was at Yale at the time, and he started showing me the research. And I know this podcast deals a lot with research. Well, you cannot believe how much research there is. I mean, truly scientific research in this field. It has gone from what we saw, 50 years ago in the field of turning the lights up in the factory to putting people in MRI machines and studying their brain waves and very nuanced, highly complex psychological and physiological research tied to leadership. We wound up in our new book, this book called Organizations for People. Michael did this part of the work. It was amazingly hard. We have 40 pages 40 pages of footnotes alone of all of the research that we it's small print research that we citations for the research. So so there's lots and lots and lots of it, and it all points to one thing. Michael and I 12 years ago wrote our first book together called Leading with Kindness, which was also based on research. And it was, what the title said, kind leadership. You shouldn't be a killer boss. It's, that kind leadership really does work. And we proved it with research. And this book is, in a sense, a follow-up on that. With more recent research, with more that, being kind, and by the way, you have to be careful how you define kind. That doesn't mean being a doormat or a pushover or somebody that, says yes to everything. Right. This is a person who is confident, has very high standards, gives very clear instructions, is not afraid to fire people, but yet is not some kind of an insane killer. And kindness varies from workplace to workplace. Everything has to fit in. And in this book, we studied 21 different companies and how they managed kind leadership and how they were successful as a result of that. So that's what Organizations for People is all about.
Yeah. One of the things, I don't know if you deal with this in this book, Bill. One of the things I argued in my book called Flexibility in 2009, and I want to get your perspective on it. One of the things I argued was it appears that women leaders are better managing very complex systems. So large companies, countries, and I argued that that's because, even from an evolutionary perspective, women always dealt with more complex systems where men had more of a process view. Mm-hmm. And you can see, in the latest COVID situation, countries led by women seem to have done exceptionally well. So Germany, New Zealand, Taiwan are examples of this, where large countries led by more, let's say, macho men appear to have done less well. Do you have a view on that?
Well, my view is you're absolutely right. And it's interesting because as a sidebar, we covered that a little bit in our books, but I'm glad you did it. You and I should team up, because one of the things I say in speeches whenever I do that, and I haven't been doing many speeches lately, is that somehow or another, in my personal life experience, women tend to be better bosses than men. Yep. And I don't know what all the reasons are. Certainly the matriarchy thing, you cited some of the rational reasons why that would be the case, that they're used to, part of genetically have had to deal with more complex issues, more balls in the air, et cetera. Right. And I agree with it. That's why in this Organizations for People book, I asked Rachel Moore, and I mentioned her earlier. Rachel Moore started out as a ballet dancer, wanted to was apparently a very good one, went to New York, broke her ankle. She was in the Corps de Ballet, so that's the end of that career at age 25. This is a number of years ago. Couldn't get into college because nobody wanted a 25-year-old freshman. Somehow she did. She got into Brown, graduated, I think, top of her class, then went to either, I think, Columbia or Harvard Business School and did phenomenally well there. Came back, ran the ballet, turned it around economically, and now is running the second or third biggest performing arts center in America, the Music Center of Los Angeles, 5 theaters, symphony, the whole thing, 2,000 employees. One of the most gifted managers I've ever seen, but also a kind manager. Yeah. She's and that's the other secret is, and honestly, women often are kinder than men. There's something about, hey, to be a strong man, you've got to be a tough, nasty guy. Well, that's not true, but many people, especially bosses, tend to think that. Yeah. Whereas, she just wants to get the job done. She wants to treat people fairly and honestly. She's an incredible, to me, one of the finest executives in America. So to answer your question, what research we've seen in that field, you've even seen more, it sounds like, proves that that's the case. And just my personal life experience proves that that's the case. So I think we have a flag to wave here, and we'd better do it.
Yeah. I would love to collaborate on that, Bill. The other aspect that you talk a lot about in the book, which I fully agree with, is really the caring culture aspect of a successful organization. And I have very fond memories of a company called Hewlett-Packard Company in the early 90s, where I was only for 6 months in between my business school years as an intern. And it was a very distinct culture that everybody sat together in a big factory floor. They were, it's kind of removing the hierarchy that we came to expect in companies completely. It was very engineering-driven company, obviously, but it was culturally very egalitarian, and just a joy to be in the company. And so, from a sort of a diagnostic perspective, in my book, I have a diagnostic kit. If you go to a company and you say, I want to see where this company is in terms of its culture, its evolution. There are a few quick things you can look at, and it's all people related and structure related, and you can quickly see how the company operates. And you have talked about this in this book, that it's easy to do short-term things. It's easy to show performance in the short run, but it's much more difficult in the very long run, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and that's one of the problems with, I think, particularly American business, that it is all directed towards quarterly performance, and your eye gets off the ball for the long term. That's why some of the greatest companies have unfortunately been pushed away. The companies that we needed the most in America. The early and original AT&T is an example. There are just, my old corporation, I was president of television for Westinghouse Electric Company.
Yeah.
They were, a truly great company in many ways. My friend Warren Gibson, Dr. Warren Gibson, who was the co-author of the performance book that we did, the book we did about the world's your stage for Juilliard and Fordham, he ran an engineering and was founder of an engineering company, a small one in California, and he said his main goal was to treat people right. And to treat people fairly. Well, he was phenomenally successful. He said his original funder, he didn't have a lot of money when he was graduating from engineering school in Cleveland. His aunt made some investment, and he came back, he told me 5 years later, and gave her a return on her investment, which was 60 times the amount of money she invested. And he was very proud of that and felt very good about it. I said, well, what did she say? He said, thank you.
That's the best thank you can give. Yeah, it's
so at any rate, you're right, Gil, and I wish we would do more of that. And I think your two examples are good. Right now, arguably the world's best leader is Angela Merkel.
So also, Bill, in the book, you mentioned some statistics. 36% of the employees say they have dysfunctional managers, and 75% of workers say their boss is the most stressful part of the job. I find these numbers really amazing. And this is what's happening. So you had talked about, the small engineering company out in California. It seems to me, I haven't really thought about this, Bill, but it seems to me that technology-driven companies in the 70s and 80s were really good companies, because I think their culture was more egalitarian, I think, right?
Correct. I think that is right. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
And we seem to have, sort of drifted away from it. I don't know. I mean, you probably know more about this than I do. The financial institutions, the large consulting companies, they tend to be highly competitive. They tend to be very much, economics focused companies. So as the economy change, when we take a cross section of the companies from the whole economy, I guess we get numbers like you have in the book.
Yes, let me give you a few more numbers. You cited two numbers that are in our book, but a recent Canadian study, meaning about less than a year old, 2 out of 5 people on this study said they would quit, said that they had quit their jobs because of bad bosses. 2 out of 5 Canadians. Wow. In 2015, NBC did a poll that said most people would forego a 10% raise in salary in exchange for a kinder boss. And most all of the studies, and there's lots of new research that has just come out dealing with kindness. They ask people all these questions about what are the things that are most important to you, money and this and that. And, so the studies all showed, when asked 34 different qualities that you could have in a company, in a friend, in a romantic partner, in a boss, and an employee, the number one factor kept coming up: kindness. So that's what we want. That's what what the wiring of our psyche requires, and that's what we are not getting. That's why the feeling of, particularly America and other parts of the Western world, the behavior and our own intrinsic needs are are polar opposites right now.
Right. Do you see, I know that, you deal with students in Juilliard as well. Do you see a difference between our generation and the next generation in terms of their orientation in this dimension?
I do. At least the students I see now. Again, I'm in a distorted environment, so I don't. Fordham is less distorted, I presume. Certainly, Juilliard's very distorted, very unusual, and different kinds of people. Yeah. But the people I see at both of those schools is that they want kindness, that they're willing to forego. It's not about money anymore. It's about, hey, so I've got a feeling that the students that we see today, the young people that we see today, have seen their parents beaten to death by this economy, and they're saying, hey, there's got to be something better out there than this, and that's what they're looking for. I really sense that. I really feel that. So I have, because of our young people, not because of the other people that are around, but because of our young people, I see hope. I see hope. I have hope.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think we got caught in an objective function that is very, for lack of a better term, noisy. There were some studies that show that happiness against income, for example, is an inverted U function. Yes. In the US, it's around 65,000, 70,000 or something like that. But I have met nobody who wants to stop at 70,000. So once you're on top of the hill, right, your tendency is to run down that hill and go as far as possible. And that's an incredible thing, if you have the ability to kind of step back and say, how do I optimize happiness, right?
That's right. Yeah, I do. I really think, it's interesting. I was just talking to a friend of mine. I don't think he'd bother if I mentioned his name, and that's Mark Thompson. Yeah. Mark Thompson is the just retired president of the New York Times. He's done that for probably the past 10 years. Before that, he was the head of the BBC. He's British, very smart, very fine human being, brilliant leader. He could do anything he wants right now. He retired kind of young. He did very well economically, and he said he's been offered many more leadership jobs. But now he's thinking, hey, what good can I do? It has nothing to do with making money. What good? And I told him that one of the things I said, because I'm a lot ahead of him in age. I said that I have found right now in my life, helping younger people, by younger people, I mean, in this case, students that have recently graduated from college or in graduate school, succeed in their careers. I find great joy from that. It's not that I don't need career success. I had whatever that brings back when.
Yeah.
Now I love to see and help others succeed, and there's a lot of value that comes from that, personal value. That you get more than they get when you do that. So again, I see hopefulness because I see some of these young people who have their values, are willing to do it. I have a scientist relative, close relative who's a scientist, who was ordered by his employer. He has a PhD in geology, not to talk about global warming and that kind of stuff. So he said he couldn't do that, and he quit his job. At great sacrifice.
Right. Yeah. So in conclusion, Bill, if you look forward 5 years, you have diagnosed some of these issues that we see inside companies, in larger chunks of societies. Do you see some policy type interventions that you might think about to let's say get on the right track?
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are. I mean, I think a lot of it is going to have to be education, But I think we have, in many respects, in America, pretty good policies. I don't want to overkill. Add paperwork to doing the right thing. Right. And I also don't want people, because when you have kind of formal policies, very often those tend to be manipulated too. I think it's got to start coming from more and more from the heart. Where does that come from? It comes from everything from religion to philosophy to family values that lead to doing the right thing. So I think, among other things, good example of the kind that, say, Mark Thompson has when as leader of the New York Times, when he did that, of people like Rachel Moore, who leads a great performing arts institution. These people will be, I hope, honored, followed, and I think they're the ones that give us hope that, by good example, that doing the right thing really does pay off, and it pays off even at the bottom line, and one could say sometimes especially at the bottom line. So there is hope here, and the kinds of studies and science that's going into the kind of research that you've done already in your book, that hopefully Dr. Michael O'Malley and I are doing in ours and our work. We're picking away at this, and hopefully we'll get somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this has been great, Bill. Really appreciate the time that you spend with me, and good luck with all the stuff that you do.
Well, Gil, thank you. Thank you for finding me and celebrating our books and our thinking on your wonderful podcast. I hope we may stay in touch. So you take care, and onward and upward.
Thanks so much, Phil. Thank you. Bye.